It's Wizards versus Lesbians, a podcast for your ears. Hello and welcome to Wizards versus Lesbians. My name's Isaac.
I'm Alexis.
I'm Lianyu Tan.
Hello. And we have a guest today, and we are here to talk about a book called Shell Game by Benny Lawrence. When we have guests, it is customary for the guest to give us the plot summary. Lianyu, would you be so kind?
So the brattiest brat micromanages a reluctant noblewoman into becoming pirate queen in a secondary world adventure on the high seas. And it's adorable.
Yes.
That's
admirably succinct, and I think it definitely gives you everything that you need to know. Did we forget our own format again? Yes. Are there wizards in this book? No. Are there lesbians? Yes. Are there himbo lesbians? Just one. Maybe two. Why should you read this book? I'll start with Lianyu and then Alexis and then myself.
It's quite funny and it subverts some common sapphic tropes.
It was really quite entertaining, and a fairly quick, enjoyable read. Though it definitely gets pretty serious in part 3.
Yeah, I would say if you have heard the phrase "power bottom," but didn't fully understand what it meant, this book will give you a very clear idea of what topping from the bottom is like. And it sets it all out for you in very plain language from the very beginning, which is helpful. And yes, it is very, very funny at times, particularly as it sets up the phenomenon. And also, of course, if you're a fan of Xena Uber,
right?
which we keep running into on this podcast.
Yeah.
Somehow.
So after we learned that a book or duology that we reviewed started its life as Xena AU fanfic. And that, in fact, from a publisher that seems to have specialized in republishing Xena AU fanfic, we're now seeing Xena Uber everywhere. And so, this is not necessarily a bad thing. It really drives home the degree to which Xena is baked into the DNA of so much sapphic fantasy. I will also note that I read the first 2 lines out loud to my wife, and she immediately said, "Is this more Xena fanfic?" So, if you like Xena, you will really enjoy this book, I think.
It's becoming increasingly clear that we need to watch some Xena for the podcast because it is clearly foundational for our subgenre. And so stay tuned for that at some point. We'll sit down and watch a few episodes and make sure that we have the theoretical grounding that we need to enjoy these books.
Feel free to write in with your favorite Xena episode suggestions.
All right. Why shouldn't you read this book? Same order.
Well, if you think brats are always annoying, you might not want to do that. There's also some child abuse, historical and sort of present when she's an adult.
Yeah, there's definitely plenty to be talked about under content warnings.
I would say that also there is a little bit of a sense of tonal whiplash because, so it is better if you go into this expecting it to take a turn, because otherwise you're like, this is so quippy. And now there's horrible violence being committed against a defenseless young woman. But there's still some quips.
This book is very indebted to Terry Pratchett. Down to if you put the phrase "bugger this for a game of soldiers" in your book post Terry Pratchett, I know that you're a big fan of Terry Pratchett, and that you're trying to go for a tone similar to what Terry pulls off. And I think that one of the things this book demonstrates is that is harder than it looks, to keep the jokes coming while the situation gets worse and worse, which tends to happen in the more serious Discworld books. I don't know how Terry does it, but it becomes jarring in this one. the further along you go. And yes, it's very quippy. And if you have a medium to low tolerance for quippiness, as I do, you may find yourself rolling your eyes a little bit as you get into like the last third, particularly.
Yes, though that said, I will say that this book does not do a thing that a lot of modern quippy books do. It's not snarkily quippy in the same way. It's not rolling it. It doesn't do the thing where it's being quippy so that it can roll its eyes and make it clear that, it's not being sincere, which is something that a lot of like post Joss Whedon fiction does, and that I personally find deeply annoying. So this one, even when I was like, I don't feel like the tones are matching here, this one didn't annoy me in quite the same way.
Yes, to its credit, this book does not give you the benefit of detachment. There is no sarcasm here. You are going to be right up into the face of the horrors of the world and making jokes. And I don't think that's impossible to pull off. In fact, my favorite things do that. It's just whether this particular one works for you. Your mileage may vary. Content warnings. Lots. Horrific child abuse with sexual overtones. Consensual and non-consensual DS. Bodily injury, murder, piracy, kidnapping.
Threats of forced pregnancy.
Yes. Threats of mutilation. But having said that, let us move on to the spoiler zone. Oh, we're going to the spoiler zone and talking about pirates. If there's one thing that I've learned in life, this song is about pirates.
All right.
So yeah, this is the brattiest little brat that ever bratted. Really remarkable, the degree of brat which one can fit into the first few chapters. This book follows, I think, what is a really interesting tonal arc, which I think is the thing that we both zoomed in on at the beginning, which is that it sort of recapitulates the same trope multiple times, maybe twice, maybe three times, and the first time it's entirely played for laughs. And the second time it's played for psychology and personal pain. And I like that in principle. But this also ends up giving us what I would call a very sort of deterministic take on kink. Which is it's a difficult thing to navigate this because on the one hand, like our characters, our main characters are Xena and our Gabrielle, Darren and
Lynn.
Lynn, thank you. She has a few names, and Lynn is the one that she wants to use. Our main characters are sadistic and masochistic, respectively. And there comes a point in the book where Darren is interrogating herself in a way that will be familiar to anybody who shares these tendencies, and is like, does this make me a bad person? B, does it make it, does the person who I'm doing this to, are they really into it, or are they just trying to please me? C, because in addition to these are all four letters in BDSM that we're seeing here. We have the SM is present, but also we're in a sort of 24/7 BD situation, which is entirely engineered and forced upon the top by the bottom, in very explicit terms. It's incredibly funny. It's the funniest thing in the book.
Yes, he's just like, you must tie me up now to your mast because otherwise I will sabotage your ship.
You must bring me down to your cabin at night. What do you mean you don't have a cabin? Make a cabin. Make a cabin. Make something to chain me to in the cabin. So, but even despite the fact that she's been given explicit instructions 100% of the way down the line, because Darren is one of nature's perfect himbos, herbos.
Darren is definitely the lesbian himbo type, I think.
Yes. Well, I mean, Darren is, of course, Xena, as we've established. But despite that, Darren has to go through the thing that I think many people will relate to, where they're like, oh, but they actually can't really want this. And I must be a monster for really wanting this. And So she goes to Lynn and says, are you sure that this is what you want, despite your having given me like explicit written instructions the entire way?
And Lynn is like, yes, how many times do I have to say this?
Yes, idiot.
Let me walk you through step by step all the ways in which I have given explicit enthusiastic consent.
I mean, and even in and of itself, that's great. We're already, batting way above the average here. Like, there's still too many stories where like being sexually dominant is, just shorthand for being a bad person in SFF. And people wonder why there's a top shortage. But
right, how can you get the next generation of tops if you're already telling them that they're evil?
Exactly. But then I think the place where it doesn't work quite as well is that Lynn is like, okay, so this is okay, but why am I like this? And she's like, I must be like this because I spent my childhood ordering around like chambermaids.
Darren, you mean?
Darren says this to herself because Darren is a noble, and Darren is a noble and is suffering under the impression that Lynn is also a runaway noble. And we know that this can't be true because because A, it's a romance novel. You can't have two nobles.
Sometimes you can have two nobles, but this isn't that kind of romance novel.
Right. But also, that when Darren said to herself, I must be a top because I was a noble, the rest of the plot of the book immediately clicked into place in my brain, and it turned out to be correct. Because I was like, oh, Lynn must have been a chambermaid. Great. Because Lynn is a masochist.
The thing is that, so I feel like Lynn being a masochist is very clearly tied to the way that she was abused growing up, and that, this is clearly like her way of reclaiming that and asserting some power over that. I'm not convinced that Darren is supposed to be dominant because she's a noble. I think Darren just wants easy explanations for things. Because she says this to herself a bunch, but no one else says it to her, and Darren says a lot of stupid things to herself.
That is absolutely right. And I believe that Darren is, in fact, Darren is wrong about so many things over the course of this book, and sometimes spectacularly and disastrously wrong about so many things that I'm inclined to agree with you there, except the fact that the rest of the book's plot does in fact bear out that she is probably correct about this. In the sense that it's enough to tell what her other half's backstory is going to be.
Well, but there was so many other clues for that, so...
Admittedly. I think it's great. I think that I love the conversation, the sort of the titular shell game conversation that Lynn has with Darren's second wave feminist ex.
Yes.
Where she's like, maybe trying to win in the patriarchal within the patriarchal framework is in fact a game with no winning condition, as in like Utena. Maybe we need to break all of the rules, and so I can want to be beaten sexually, in fact, by your ex. Thank you very much. But I think on the other hand, it does feel a little bit root one in the in the sort of where does masochism come from, childhood trauma, sense. And I know that the book isn't saying like that that's the only way for this to happen. It was connecting the dots very easily in terms of like how one gets this way.
Well, I think the thing about Darren is that, the sex scenes are closed door, so we don't get any on the page insight into that. And Darren as a dom she's so bossed around that you don't really get a sense of her being that into it outside. That's the impression I got.
I suppose that's true. There is all of like, Darren's, sadism is self-reported. We don't actually see it. She says that she gets carried away in the moment, but it does feel, given the ease with which Lynn pushes her around, that Darren's might just be like, oh, I am in fact just doing what you want me to do, and that's what makes me feel good at the end of the day. So you might be right about that. Darren is like so spectacularly self-deluded throughout the entire book, which makes her a great viewpoint character for the bits where we get to be in her head, because we can't trust anything that she thinks, because her sense of self is so radically screwed up. And in fact, this book does a great job of like sort of demonstrating what power does to a person, like what growing up rich can do to a person as far as your like ability to understand yourself and the world around you.
But Darren is such a bad rich person. She had all this privilege in this very sort of desolate world, and she just threw it all away in this self-deprecating implosion, and it was ridiculous.
Right, and then her self-deprecating implosion, you know, she uses this relationship to do that, and then immediately sabotages that relationship too. Like, she clearly just wanted, I mean, obviously, you know, she was in love with Jess, at least at the time, but I think she also just, this was a way to blow up her life.
It's like the book gives you two ways to be a privilege monster, right? And one of them is the kind of privilege monster that the Darren and Lynn's parents and family are. And then it's the next step of being a privilege monster, which is the, oh no, I've realized that I have privilege, therefore
I must self-castigate constantly.
I am still the center of the universe, mind you, you know? But I'm the bad kind of center of the universe now. It's like everybody, it's my responsibility to save the entire world now. And if I fail at that, then, you know, I'm going to be a wizard and throw myself into the sea. I'm going to give up on everything.
And I think that one of the things I liked about this book is that Darren's great story arc is going, wait a minute, maybe instead of making me Pirate Queen, we could make your sister Queen, because she's actually competent.
Darren is kind of a new hero type for us. We haven't encountered much like her yet, at least not to the same degree. We've had heroes who delude themselves because they're too smart or determined for their own good. We've had fewer heroes who delude themselves because they're self-centered and kind of dumb. And I feel seen. Yes.
Like, just, you know, the idea that, oh, I don't have to passively go along with being set up as a, you know, puppet ruler. I can recognize that somebody else might actually be better at this, and maybe I can just go around having fun, while, you know, doing some good in the world. Like, it's like, that's growth, Darren. Good job. No, though, actually, so Lianyu, I wanted to know what in particular made you suggest this book. If it was, you know, if there's something specifically you wanted to talk about, or just if, like, this is a favorite or something.
Yeah, I mean, I love Benny Lawrence. I read everything she's put out, which isn't a lot, so I guess it wasn't very hard. But I love that anti-tropes in this. So, you know, you've got Darren doing the possessive thing of, oh God, you must not have sex with anyone else. And Lynn going, that's stupid. And then also at the Act 3, when Darren's response to a ticking clock is to say, no, it's too risky and I won't actually do that because I know maths and probability. And I think another author might have just given her some plot armor, but she doesn't go for it, and the narrative does punish her for it, and I just appreciate that.
I agree, and I'll tell you my very favorite trope that this reverses. I have this thing when we have a bad mom, and this is one of the all-timers in this book. But when we have a bad mom that's this bad, there's a little chant that starts playing in my head as we get closer to the denouement, and the chant goes, "Kill your mom, kill your mom, kill your mom, kill your mom." And 99% of the time the book wimps out, and, you know, because killing is bad. You shouldn't kill the monster. You should leave them alive to hurt you again, even when it's such a thorough monster as this. But in this book, no. And not even the stepdaughter, Ariadne, her actual daughter, strangles her mother to death in front of God and everyone. And I was like, yes, it's entirely justified.
And it was so well set up, too, because, like, you know, the Garrote shows up initially as this, gets well foreshadowed. It's something that Lynn gets really good at using. And then it gets handed to Ariadne, and you expect it to get passed to Lynn, but no, it's just Ariadne, and she sees the moment, and she goes for it. And I also, was about ready to applaud on that one. I do really appreciate a book that can stick the landing on holding terrible parents accountable.
Yeah, no, I found the ending extremely satisfying. Well, I was getting a little bit wobbly going up to it, but no, I think that it really did stick the landing in those terms. And also, given the fantasy setting, like, we do have some stuff that feels very true to the source material, like, the sort of the TV melodrama, drama serial, where it's like, all that you need to do to knock somebody out for an indefinite amount of time is chop them in the back of the neck, and down they go. Mm-hmm. What Kill James Bond calls the uncle chop, because the man from U.N.C.L.E. uses it to render anybody and everybody unconscious. But within that sort of, we're within TV rules. I still found, like, the way that all of the plot threads came together, like, it didn't at any time stretch the limits of credulity, and, like, stuff that shouldn't work didn't.
Yeah, that was something like and including actually putting what you were saying, Lianyu, about the sort of probability and lack of plot armor. They put her in this impossible situation where there's no way to sneak in without waiting, but she absolutely can't wait. And yes, like, she and Lynn get punished for this, but it's not like, oh, there was some obvious thing you could have done otherwise. It's, you were in a bad situation and there were no good choices, and so unsurprisingly, the choice Darren made was bad. And that just, is the way that it is. And I thought that was well handled as also.
Mm. And I love the table scene.
Yes!
So funny.
That was just, that's a really great example of just, oh, Darren, you're so stupid. Like, affectionately, but
yes.
Still.
It's good to have a protagonist who's just genuinely dumb, but still obviously one can lead her to being a good person.
Right, like, there's the things that she's good at, and outside of those things, she just has no idea what she's doing. And this is also something I think the book does a good job of, as it makes, it's good. You want your himbo, lesbian or otherwise, to be charming, and so that their stupidity is mostly, oh honey, as opposed to infuriating. Mm-hmm. And I think that this book really pulls that off, where you're just, especially as you start to watch Darren understand that she's being stupid, and she starts just going, why am I so stupid? And we're like, we know, honey, it's okay. Just please stop making bad choices now.
Yes. The sentence is written down in my note. It's sometimes when your big honorable lummox of a top is experiencing mental health, you have to go into caregiver mode. Sort of the aftercare equivalent for your top is to be like, yes, there, honey. I was being facetious there, but aftercare is also for tops. We're all going to feel weird after whatever that was. We both might need reminding that we're okay people and that we're loved.
Let's talk about the point of view switching, because I initially wasn't sure about reading stuff from Darren's point of view, and then I ended up thinking that it worked well to have the two different points of view, because Lynn, it's two different unreliable narrators. Lynn is very clear that she is, hiding stuff from all of us, both in and outside of the book, and Darren just has no idea what's going on. And so I thought that it was a fun contrast to sort of bounce between different, but I can't trust either of my narrators, but for very different reasons.
Yes, Lynn's hiding things from the viewer, and Darren is hiding things from herself.
Yes, exactly.
Darren is extremely honest, but we cannot trust how she perceives the world. And yes, even though their voices are pretty similar, beyond that, but even that sort of distinction, I think, is enough to make it, interesting and to make it work. And also, Lynn is too competent to have the whole narrative to herself. One would lose some of the dramatic heft if we were in the hands of somebody we could trust the whole way through.
I think Darren's point of view does a pretty good job of making the world feel very class-based.
That is true, because she does perceive that everywhere that she goes.
Yeah, no, and that is also a fun distinction, because Lynn is very aware of class distinctions, obviously, like that's, pretty fundamental to how she grew up, but she doesn't care about them in the same way. Part of what she's good at, again, because of how she grew up, is that she can just sort of jump between, she can, fake being from a bunch of different class registers, and so there's a certain sort of fluidity to the way that she's moving between, among different groups of people. And then you get Darren's point of view, where suddenly everything seems very static. This
is true. Set in stone, which also means, because she doesn't have Lynn's understanding of the shell game, she cannot see a way to maneuver outside of this system without being, pushed into it.
And even when she's pushed, it's great because even when she's having her dramatic epiphany of, no, you don't need a noble to rule. And so she's yelling at everyone on the ship. Basically, it doesn't matter if I go off and get myself killed trying to rescue my girlfriend, because any of you could run the ship. And they're all like, no, we can't. We're not trained for it. And we don't have your personal weird charisma, actually. Mm-hmm. And even then she's not getting it. This is, goes back to what you're saying about, even then she's still the center of the universe. She still thinks that she knows everything, even when she's trying to be no, actually, I'm not special.
Yes, I have a great analog for this situation, but it's Hunter x Hunter, and we're never going to do Hunter x Hunter on this podcast.
I'm sorry,
so
there's just too much of it.
I'm just gonna let it be.
Okay, you can add a jingle about it if you'd like.
Oh, thank you. That's very generous of you. I was talking about Crollo, who thinks that he's replaceable as the leader of the Phantom Troop. But that's because he's a cult leader who's bought into his own ideology and not a normal guy like Darren, who is just having a crisis of confidence. But yes, the cool leader's one weakness is not understanding that she does in fact have something unique, which is charisma and is leadership qualities. None of the rest of them are going to be stomping up and down the table, kicking goblets of wine into people's laps and grandstanding for 10 minutes while she tries to figure out what actually she wants to do next.
Which, is a skill that Lynn very much recognized in her and cultivated. I think that's another thing I liked about this book is you get to watch Lynn cultivate all of these sneering pirate queen traits that she sees the potential in Darren for. And Darren initially isn't doing it, right? She's just sort of baffled. But by the end of the book, she's totally leaning into the scene-chewing pirate queen stuff because she has a natural gift for it, and she just needed somebody to nurture that.
I'm going to do the misandry minute here.
Okay.
Because I think this book does a nice job of having a good man or two hanging around.
It has at least 3.
Indeed, and it also fridges one of them. I always like to see a man get fridged to establish stakes. It does that right off the bat. The first time that they get into a big fight. But despite that, I like how we have a nice range of big bads. Although you could do a drinking game with this book every time that somebody gets attacked in the crotch, or a man specifically gets kicked or punched or stabbed in the crotch.
Well, but this is the Xena roots.
I suppose that is true, but I thought as a general matter that it navigated it that well.
Yeah, I mean, and I like we get a broad range of different kinds of people. I mean, we get we have Latoya, is that her name? Who's
yes.
the massive, we have our just massive slab of lesbian, who it turns out is also really good at navigational math. and bad at girls.
Oh, I loved the, like, that you could tell from minute one what was going on in Anastasia's brain. Ariadne's brain, which was, oh, she's large. she's so large. I've never seen anybody so large.
And that their their mutual infatuation happened quite quickly, but was fairly convincing nonetheless. And we also, and like we have our different kinds of good dudes, right? We have our like sort of uncle, nice uncle father figure type who's Teak, and we have the sort of the bro who's his name's Rogan maybe, and then we have the like nice gay guy, and so it's nice to have both a explicit diversity of body types and personality types, and all men, and not just the one token good man.
Incidentally, I think it's funny how like I kind of wish that we'd have this we'd had a scene because every single one of Lynn's strategies involves her being tied up or held prisoner or or taken hostage in some way, and it's like the men are wondering why every single one of your plans involves you being elaborately tied and trussed to something, and whether
I don't think the men are wondering. I think the men figured it out very quickly.
That's the other great thing. Like Darren is always the last to figure any of this stuff out. Her crew seems to be very aware of all of these dynamics.
Everyone is like, yes, she's insisting. She's obviously got a thing for the captain. Is insisting she be tied to the mast. Well, clear what's going on there. We'll just let them have fun with that. Actually, so one thing, speaking of times when she gets tied, when she's supposed to be tied up or taken prisoner, I actually thought that an interesting trope subversion was the thing where she's going to go over to the enemy's ship, and have sex with its captain to bribe him not to kidnap them, because you get your I feel like the somewhat self-righteous conflict about, look, it's just sex. I've had to do survival sex before. Stop making such a big deal out of it. That definitely shows up in a certain kind of modern romance, and which is good. But I actually really enjoyed that we have this moment, and and we make our point, but also that's not what was going on here at all. Actually, she shouldn't have done this, not because survival sex is bad, but because maybe you shouldn't go over and hand yourself over as a hostage to the enemy
when it's already been established that you might be the most valuable hostage on board.
Right, exactly. When you're a fugitive and a valuable hostage,
which goes to show that in fact going to the same well too many times, even if it is your kink, might not work out so well for you in the end.
Right, and it's also nice just to see a rare moment where Lynn is not, where Lynn makes a bad call.
It's interesting, like that sort of, the survival sex isn't really that big a deal thing is also recapitulated later on with Ariadne, where it's like, she was, her husband desperately trying to father a child on her was, not particularly traumatic for her as far as you can tell, more like a waste of time. And in fact, she had at least some affection for the poor, dumb young man, as is evidenced by the thing that finally makes her snap and attack her mother, is the revelation that they probably killed him.
I don't know. I think she wanted to kill her mother regardless. I think she was just waiting for the right moment.
I mean, it was certainly a handy excuse in the moment that might be, helpful for the soldiers that were standing around. But she does.
I'm pretty sure that she decided she was going to kill her mother once she found out that that her parents had killed Lynn's mother.
Yes, that is more the breaking point. But
who she genuinely cared about. And, for that matter, Lynn, who she genuinely cares about.
But the point being that she did not despise him for, his role in this.
Right, which is also really funny because Darren has met the guy and is like, oh no, if at the point when Darren still thinks that Lynn is Ariadne, and Darren is like, oh no, she must have been so abused being with this guy, and it turns out no, like he wasn't a great husband or a great boyfriend, but he was not the monster here. he was just some dumbass. And our pair of sisters, both of whom are used to, are just sort of resigned to this, are like, well, I'm not thrilled about having to have sex with terrible dudes, but there are so many worse things that could happen, like everything Ariadne's mother does to Lynn.
Yes, it's like, okay, we have the system, and there's a degree of violence inherent in the system, always.
Right.
And a degree of lack of agency and control inherent in the system, always. But then you get somebody who really enjoys inflicting punishment on you, who can use the system to do it.
In a non-consensual fun way.
And that is a separate category. Yeah. No, I think that the book doesn't make it explicit that Ariadne's mother is getting off on torturing Lynn, but it seems very, very obvious.
Yeah.
Because there's a level of inventive cruelty there that... and her, like, sort of going glassy-eyed and, short of breath when she's doing it, that kind of definitely implies that this is the bad kind of sexual sadism.
Right.
Is being worked out. Even if it's not explicitly sexual, it still is coming from the same place and is being worked out on somebody over whom you have absolute control.
I also did enjoy that, I do enjoy when you have your abusive parent and then you have your enabler parent, and the enabler parent is also, held appropriately responsible. Particularly the way in which the dad's sort of affection for Lynn is so clearly hollow. And that, it was like, okay, yeah, no, actually, you also deserve to die. I'm fine with that by the narrative rules of the book.
I think part of the point that is being made here is that this is the book doubles down on, how central the class system is to this particular nation over and over again. Like, the commoner, to do another Pratchettism, the flaw in man is that he was designed to bend at the knee. Is that Darren particularly thinks that peasants automatically defer to nobles almost on an animal level. But
which is, of course, why Lynn has to be a noble, because how else would she be able to boss Darren around so effectively?
Yes, but Darren thinks that because she's from inside the system, and from inside the system, it is said over and over again that your children are your lifeblood, they are your inheritance, which means that they are your property. And I think that one of the points that the book is keen to make is that under those circumstances, that it is impossible to love your children. Like the difficulty that, the speed with which the Baron will throw even the child that he is supposed to love, Ariadne, under the bus when she is inconvenient, it's very clear that this sort of literally objectifying your children, making them into objects that can be traded or given away or, bred, does mean that you cannot have a personal connection with them. And, growing up without a personal emotional connection to your parents makes you fucked up. And that fucked upness is hereditary. And that explains how they all got that way.
Right, which also, because you also see that with Darren, where you would expect in this world, this is actually, I think, really clever of the book. You would expect in this world that if your children are your lifeblood and your immortality and the key to your status and your protection from assassins, that you would cherish and adore and dote on them. And every single noble parent we see is awful and is totally willing to cast their children aside because, like you say, they're only a means to an end.
Absolutely. At the end, the bag is the most important thing. And if your children are the bag, then you're going to treat them as such.
Which is why they're totally willing to reduce, Lynn to nothing but a womb, including we can just cut off your hands and feet and blind you. That's fine.
Yes. So, Lianyu, do you have any other bits and bobs of the book that you would like to discuss?
Nothing I can think of off the top of my head. I think with the transactional sex, can I just go back to that for a second? I think the only other book I really saw that handled so casually was He Who Drowned the World.
Oh,
Yes,
yes!
absolutely.
Absolutely. Where, again, it's like, well, this isn't pleasant. I wouldn't do this if I had a better option, but it's not going to, like, deeply traumatize me forever.
Also, perhaps not coincidentally, a book that is extremely bound up in bloodlines and aristocracy and human beings as the inheritance of power, which is, one in which the young Messiah is murdered in a calculating way just because that playing piece is on the wrong end of the board. And maybe that dryness when it comes to the value of sex is a inevitable progression from reproduction also being sort of a move on the board, a power move. It really does just drain all of the potential for personal love out of family life when families are the power base in a society.
Yeah. And, man, He Who Drowned the World is so good.
That is also true.
So
Really
sad.
good book. So I listened to the audiobook of this. Is the house that Ariadne comes from the House of Bane with a B?
I think it's Bain.
I think so too, yeah.
That's good. Because every time the audiobook narrator said it, it sounded like House of Pain. And there are two separate songs that the phrase House of Pain brings into my head, which were then playing in my head for the next 5 to 10 pages after I did it. And one of them, at least, is absolutely going to end up as a jingle here.
Excellent. Well, this is just a feature of English and the way that we don't really distinguish between between voiced unaspirated and unvoiced unaspirated when it's initial versus in the middle of the word.
Yes, I think that is possibly the least interesting observation I've ever made on this podcast. But
Yes,
there it is. It's in my notes.
Yes, but then I got to tap into my long defunct linguistics major, so hey.
Yeah, there you go. I'm going to do the one that's actually relevant to the themes of the book, sort of. What is the law? No spill blood. What is the law? No spill blood. Who makes the rules? Someone else. Who makes the rules? Someone else. What happens when we break the law? What happens when the rules aren't fair? We all know where we go from there. To the House of Bane. To the House of Bane. To the House of... And so on.
Yeah.
Actually, you know what? Here's the thing to talk about. Let's talk about pirates.
Okay.
And the long running appeal of piracy and pirates. Because and this comes up in the Master and Commander books, which we may or may not eventually get back to.
Oh, we'll get back to. We'll do that at some point.
But it's like cultural hegemony is never absolute, right? As a general matter, there's always some sort of underground that you can escape to, and it's always a certain amount romantic and a certain amount dangerous and a certain amount awful, and you will probably die there sooner than you would if you had not stayed within the culture. And that's explicitly sort of the point of the shell game. The shell game metaphor is that when you choose to step outside the rules, there are also no rules protecting you, and you're also out for life. And in a maritime society like this, generally the most obvious and what's the word that I want? The most obvious and sort of available thing to do is to become a pirate. And in becoming a pirate, you essentially become an outlaw for life, and you are never going to be able to go back to the family structures and the rules that might have sheltered you. And you are going to, it makes the sort of, outsiderness, the externality, so like satisfyingly explicit that you're not even in the country anymore. You're on your own little country out at sea, in your little boat.
Or your slowly growing little fleet.
Yes. I mean, it's nice if you're the captain out there also. But, you're also definitely exchanging one set of rules for another one. And while that set of rules may be ad hoc, it is equally as stringent and deadly in its execution. So, your full libertarian fantasy is never going to come true, I'm afraid. But it is. I think that the sort of the heart of the romance of piracy, particularly, is just in this idea that, this is where you could be, to at least a certain extent, loosed from the strictures of heterosexuality, loosed from the strictures of gender, loosed from the strictures of race. If there is no other way to do that, there's always, becoming a vagabond thief.
Right, but I mean, there is, as you say, like the sea is its own country. Like, there's a reason why even now people keep trying to take up seasteading, and I mean, for that matter, like you also get the appeal of seasteading shows up in the Confucian Analects. Like, it's this is a centuries long fantasy across cultures of humankind. Is fuck all this. I want to go onto the ocean and get away from it all.
That's the first page of Moby Dick, isn't it?
Right, exactly.
Like, I must go down to the sea.
Just get away from all this.
I'm sick of we living in a society. Please, no longer must I live in a society. I want to live on a boat instead.
And of course, the downside is that when you're on a boat, you're just stuck with these people, which is why I will never go on a cruise.
You might get Captain Darren. You might get Captain Ahab.
Right. But, I thought, so a sort of nice little touch in this world building is the fact that this is a island nation, or a series of island city-states kind of, who are undergoing a civil war. And so, first of all, that's a lot of good opportunities for piracy, but also it makes, piracy during times of peace is predatory, and in this case wouldn't work for Darren, but piracy in the middle of a civil war is like, well, all of these sides are awful and going around murdering people. So it's not like, so we have plenty of people to attack who aren't just peaceful traders.
Yes, there is a bit in Aubrey Maturin where Aubrey, because of various stock market problems, ends up becoming a privateer, and which is that's the piracy for dudes who still want to believe that they're moral, is being a privateer, because you have that little letter of marque. You're like, yes, actually, even though I'm getting to live like an awesome pirate and we don't have to do all the stupid Navy stuff, I'm still a patriot. I'm still a part of the community, because we're fighting the good fight. And in this case, she has her own letter of marque from herself, but it's still like a quasi-military thing for her. And in fact, now she has a monarch to rep for in Ariadne. So she might as well have a letter of marque from Ariadne to go out and continue fighting the Civil War.
Yes, that's actually, so there's sort of the three phases in Darren's post-disowning naval career, right? First, there's the vigilante hero, which is just a disaster. And then then Lynn takes over, and there's the rising pirate queen, which is significantly more successful because Lynn is significantly more competent. And also because being a vigilante hero privateer doesn't actually get you any money. Being a pirate queen who preys on military vessels does. And then you have the third phase, which pretty much happens between the last chapter and the epilogue, of being, of picking a third side in the Civil War in the hopes that maybe we can have a slightly better government eventually.
Yes. And, presumably part 4 is then you are the captain of the King's Navy at the end of it, or the Queen's in this instance. The Queen and her queen and their child, who will presumably also be a queen of some sort. And, hopefully it's a slightly better society this time than it was last time. We can only hope.
There is a sequel to this book. It's Beggar's Flip that came out in 2019.
Oh, I will totally read that. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent.
Does she in fact become the captain of the Queen's Navy, or am I mistaken?
I don't remember that, but it has been a while since I've read it.
Wrapping it up. Well, we're getting up to time here. Does anybody have any last notes before we bring this to a close?
Oh, I'm good.
Okay.
Okay.
I think I would just say that this is this is a fun one. This is definitely, I think, I feel like this definitely kind of qualifies as one of our special little guys, which is how
almost by default, yeah.
Which is how we refer to generally the, books that are a little silly or a little weird and not big hits, but that we feel are underappreciated.
Mm-hmm. And it's like, I think that if there is an obstacle to this becoming a bigger hit, as it were, it's the insistence on getting really grubby with it in the second half, and really getting down to the detail of the horror and the abuse, which I really appreciate.
I think that was the right choice on the part of the author.
Like, the violence in this book is more explicit than the sex, but in a way that is meant to horrify rather than to titillate. And yes, it is sort of interesting because, like, it is like the first third is genuinely funny, because the humor is coming from the absurdity of the situation. This is just to me, because humor is always subjective, but to me, the first third of the book is genuinely funny because, like, the entire setup of the power bottom pirate, hostage, maiden, ruling from below is inherently great, and a lot of funny situations arise from that. But
also, just like Darren's complete baffled going along with it really helps sell the whole situation. Mm-hmm. Like, it's the characters play off each other very nicely in this absurd situation.
And there's flashes of that later on, like the whole, waylaying her, Ariadne's second husband to be, and pretending and dressing up as him and thinking that this is going to work.
Right.
And then that, sort of coming off exactly as it does. That, that's also, like, the funny is coming from the situation. But, like, I think there's a lot of it where there is, like, nothing funny at all about the situation, and the tone of the prose and dialogue continue to behave as if there is. Which I think is, like, probably sort of the biggest obstacle to it coming off as a normal read. I'll put it that way. And, like, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just like, that is the thing that makes it a special little guy. That is sort of the jarring note, which is sometimes what you want, particularly if you're a person who has read 130 books for this podcast at this point and is looking for some novelty. That was certainly novel.
Right, yeah. No, I think one thing this podcast has done to both of us is make us much more interested in stuff that makes unusual choices, that makes conventionally good choices. And this book, I mean, it's inherent to the whole shell game metaphor. Sometimes you've got to, like, mess around with the rules, and the results may or may not be successful, but they're always interesting and can move things along in ways that would otherwise be impossible.
Well, thank you so much for trying it out. It's one of my favorites, so I do appreciate
No, thank you for recommending it. I genuinely enjoyed reading it, and I will be reading the sequel.
Yeah, I'm glad to be able to, particularly for these, smaller press books, I'm glad to be able to put it out there to the extent, that our audience is interested, or to the extent that our audience exists.
Our audience is small, but
I hope that this can find its way to a few, to a few folks that might otherwise have read it.
Exactly.
And in that spirit, if you haven't read The Wicked and the Willing by our guest Lianyu Tan, It's really good.